Hey guys, welcome back to Eversoul. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at an updated tier list for including Velanna. This one is over on Pridewind. So as I always say in these videos, if you can do me a favor, just hit the link, go there. It doesn't help me out at all. I just like getting the traffic to their channel to help them boost in the algorithm and all that sort of stuff because they're doing fantastic work. So if you can help them out, just click the link, go to this this page anyway, and just show them some support, and that would be great. But let's take a look at this tier list, including Velanna. Now, I've done some testing on her. I made a video on her about a day and a half ago. I'm really quite impressed with her, but I don't think she's completely broken. So let's take a look. Now, we've got two tier lists to look at. We've got the early game, and we've also got the mid game. So, you know, we're still not at end game with where we are in the game, so just keep that in mind. So end game is always going to be something completely different because keeping in mind, in early and mid game, you can always have one character power leveled above the others and stuff like that, so it can manipulate the thoughts and stuff. And end game, once we get all characters the same level and it's balanced out, it does always shift metas. So keep that in mind. And in particular, when you're looking at any tier list, don't worry if a unit you like's low. If you have fun, just go ahead and use it. So let's take a look at her placement in this tier list, and she does drop into the S tier for the early game tier list. Now, I think this is quite pretty much fair when we look at what the top ranks are, especially when we look at something like Petra, who's just a splashable tank in the early game and she just survives just about anything, so you can do whatever strat you want. That's sort of where she is. Obviously, Adrian's just crazy, and same with Talia with her damage, healing, and energy recovery. Now, this is once again in the early game, chapters 1 to 9. So then we move into the SS tier, and you jump into something like Vivian. And I definitely think Vivian does bring a bit more to the table, especially in the early game, than what Velanna does, just purely based off that extra haste that she brings. And normally in the early game, you are capable of bringing multiple DPS. So, you know, Vivian is an enabler as well as a DPS. And the thing about Vivian is, even though she got her nerf to the range of her ability, normally you're not going to be wanting to use her ultimate as the first ultimate of the game because it doesn't have max stacks and it's not going to be dealing as much damage. So I find that Vivian, even though she got the range nerf, in most situations, it doesn't really affect her because you're normally using her as the second ult, and by then you've normally killed one or two enemies and got them more grouped up, so she is able to use that massive ult and deal the huge damage. So that's why I definitely think in the early game, once again, Vivian does actually take the cake in this situation with that positioning, and get into the double S tier. And obviously, Dora's pretty cheesy in the early game when you have a power leveled as well, especially if you have her with something like a Catherine. So I feel like this positioning, pairing her in the same in the same tier as something like a Jade, and I honestly think maybe she'd slot up a little bit, but I haven't personally tested it. This is just based off theory and the experience that I had in the early game. I feel like she'd almost creep above something like Jade, and I think Ira's pretty good in the first few chapters actually. But yeah, fair placement. Like I said, the one awkward thing about her is, with a lot of early game accounts, depending on RNG, obviously things like Petra and Prim are still fantastic units, but because we've got the $1 pack giving the Talia, and then we also get the free copy of Chloe, once again, it shifts towards being so much easier to bring something like a Naya or a Vivian if you've pulled them, as opposed to just chucking a Velanna in, because once again, you're also going to get the extra stat boosts. And then when we look at the rest of the top tiers here, a lot of people are using like Catherine, Jiho, something like that. So depending on RNG, it is a lot easier to use something like Vivian in a team to create that fairy bonus, because you can get this one for $1 and this one for free, which does set you up along the way on what you're building. So she's harder to place into a team, is basically what I'm trying to say there. So that is pretty much the early game. I'm pretty happy with that positioning. It's pretty solid. So let's jump over into the mid game and take a look at the mid game tier list. And as you can see, this one, she has been plonked into the double S tier. Now, something to note with her, and why in the mid game she does get a lot better. If we jump over here and just take a look, now 201 is going to be fantastic because that's when the ult is going to start stunning, which is going to be great. But when we look at this one at 181, she also does manage to get the stun on the main skill as well. So if you can get her to 181, unlocking that stun effect is going to be a huge one to kick into it. So she does sort of, that's why in the mid game she goes up, because then she starts to bring some control. Now, the thing about her in the mid game, if we go back and look at this, is And this is what I said in my testing, and this was my early impressions before I pulled for her, is that she can't survive that well. Yes, in clutch situations, once you get to like the enemy having 1 or 2 units, she can survive. The sustain's enough. But in general, even though she has that 40% lifesteal that it goes up to, it does, like, if you do alt skill into main skill, yes, she can heal like 60%. But the damage mitigation she provides, she does get a damage mitigation on like one of her sub skills, which is this one here, a 30% damage mitigation essentially, which is nice, but it's just nowhere near enough. If you've played a Chloe before, you understand that even with a Chloe, when she's getting attacked by a few units, she just gets absolutely melted, even with her massive passive and her defense buffs that she gives herself. So you can see that Velanna isn't really going to survive in that situation. Now, I still think you can put her in the front row if she's power leveled, and maybe have like, you know, a Chloe with her and something like a Catherine there to provide the invincibility, or maybe you've just got a strong healing team. Maybe you got like a Jiho in there with her as well. But once again, I think she falls fairly into this positioning alongside the Naya. You know, Mephi, I haven't really used Mephi much myself because I don't have the Ascensions. I do still think Mephi might be weighted heavily because of the high Ascension that people got her to, based on the banner being out at the start, but I'm not too sure. She's still a great unit, but yeah, I think she falls nicely into this category with the other units that she's paired with inside there, because she can deal massive amounts of damage, and once you get that extra control on her, depending on the enemy team, you can run her as a solo DPS, and then maybe you can't run Vivian for the haste, but maybe you can run something like a Jiho for that extra support. You know, you can run multiple, like you could run her with double healers and double tanks depending on the team and still get some really solid damage out of her. Like I said, if you can correlate doing, depends if you get other bleeders as well, but if you don't have other bleeders, she can still deal some solid damage, and just synergizing using her ultimate, and you put it on manual and using her ultimate and then following it up with her main skill, because her ultimate does apply a bleed where her main doesn't. They both deal the extra damage, but if you can ult first and get that bleed on, then use her main, which is going to deal the additional damage. That's going to be the way you want to do it, because like I said, the other way you do it is going to be main first and you don't get the additional damage because you don't have the bleed, and then you do the ult second and you still don't get the additional damage because your main didn't apply a bleed. So I think definitely some usage can, the way you use her can definitely affect it, but in general, she's a really solid carry unit in the early to mid game. We'll have to see how she functions in the late game. On paper, her ult can deal the most damage, but I think that's going to be once you put her into teams with other bleeders, and I can see an eventual bleed team being produced, specifically utilizing Ayame. I think she's going to be fantastic in that, and the cool thing that I think is, depending on enemy formations, you might even get away with a single copy of Ayame. Now, this is me talking endgame later on. But I feel like because of her AoE bleed capabilities, I think that she might have a really strong case to be able to pair with this, to really maximize damage, especially in AoE fights, and just absolutely melt teams. So not too sure, but once again, the other thing about Ayame that's really cool is that she does have that charm. So even at one copy, you know, she can provide that charm and she can provide the bleed amplification for Velanna. So I'm very keen to see as the game evolves. I'm going to pick one copy up of her from the shop when I get the points, and see and test it out, because I think it could be a viable play, and then you just got to run super tanky for the rest of it to help you survive. But that is pretty much all we're going to go into for the Velanna tier list. Like I said, placements S on early game and SS on mid game is a very fair placement for her. I'm going to keep testing her, pushing through that chapter 14 and see what we can get to. But in general, I am very impressed with her so far. Mine is still not quite at Origin because I'm lacking the food, but as soon as I get the food, I will take her all the way to Origin, which will definitely help my usage with her as well. But anyway, guys, that is going to be it for this one. Thanks for watching. Hope you have an awesome day, and I look forward to seeing the next one. Cheers.